Brian Kelly has been fired as LSU's head football coach. We've got everything you need to know. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts. Of course, on YouTube as well, so please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. How quickly things accelerated is one of the most surprising parts of the show we're doing here today, with LSU firing Brian Kelly amid his fourth season in Baton Rouge, and LSU losers of 3 of their last 4 games. Most recently, of course, an embarrassing one-sided loss at home to Texas A&M, 49-25 on Saturday night in Tiger Stadium. Over the course of this episode, I want to talk about Brian Kelly's tenure, ultimately how this accelerated so quickly, what the buyout looks like, and I think what everybody is interested in, and that is who's next. If you're an everydayer or you follow me on any platform, you've probably heard me say throughout the course of this season that Brian Kelly was not going to get fired because there was no desire realistically to pay $53 million buyout. And I have had that reiterated to me so many times from administrators, boosters, board members, you name it. All the way up to the governor of the state of Louisiana, who is so in tune with the finances around the state's flagship university that he even tweeted after the game on Saturday night with LSU's loss to Texas A&M, suggesting the board reconsider boosting ticket prices for next season, considering the performance on the field. And a week ago when LSU lost to Vanderbilt, so by the way, being very clear, I have so many times said LSU is not firing Brian Kelly after the season because they're not going to spend the buyout money. So the question then is what changed? And to illustrate how rapidly this changed, I want to take you back to last week in Nashville when LSU lost to Vanderbilt. Every year, the LSU Board of Supervisors makes one road trip. They put on their gaudy purple LSU Board of Supervisors jackets, and they have a board dinner the Friday night before the game. They all go to the game. They're on the field before the game and so on. And so even after last Saturday's loss to Vanderbilt, the consensus feeling then, even after that, again, this isn't my opinion, just to be clear. This is me just sharing with you the opinions of people who would actually have an influence in making these decisions, was that there was no appetite to spend north of $50 million to buy out Brian Kelly, and the 2 losses were on the road at Ole Miss and on the road at Vanderbilt. 2 close losses, although the marquee says Ole Miss Vanderbilt, 2 close losses on the road against teams ranked in the top 10. That's not an unforgivable offense. That's not a fireable offense, losing on the road to top 10 teams. What happened Saturday night in Tiger Stadium, however, is the thing that pushed everything over the edge. This was an all-in season for LSU. Consider, Brian Kelly, I want to remind you, Brian Kelly, before this season, made the now infamous "we're taking receipts" comments. If you missed it, this was Brian Kelly.
We're taking receipts, and we'll see you at the national championship. This team's building. We're excited about them, and we're really proud of them.
So when the head coach says we're taking receipts, we'll see you at the national championship, and then asks for fan and booster support for NIL, even doing the $1 million match. Remember, Brian Kelly himself put $1 million of his own money into this roster. Okay. So however you want to phrase it, the man put his money where his mouth is. He put $1 million of his own money into this. And then they went all in the transfer portal. They signed the number 1 portal class in the country. I've been very transparent with you when I've had numbers and shared them with you. You don't need me to tell you anything off the record. Brian Kelly said on the record, $18 million is what they spent on this roster. Okay, well, if you're all in, you're talking about taking receipts and being all in for a championship, $18 million roster, you're a preseason top 10 team in the country, and you got 3 losses before November, and it's over. And by the way, you lose to Vanderbilt. It's your second loss. You go into this home game against Texas A&M with an all-in approach, understanding like you lose one more time and it's over. So you have to win to keep your playoff dream alive. And you're up 18-14 at half, and then you are blitzkrieg 21-0 in the third quarter. You lose the second half 35-7. The fans empty out. The A&M crowd takes over. The team leaves the field. Frank Wilson has to bring some guys back out to do the alma mater. Kelly, who had left, then comes back out. I mean, it was a total mess of a circumstance that was embarrassing. It was the low point that you wonder, on this low point, how do you come back from a point this low? And ultimately, they didn't. And as I was told, and we will get into some of we'll get into the money and how the buyout all is going to work here in just a second, because that's a giant part of this, which is how do you pay a $50 million buyout when you're not a super rich state and rich athletic department? I'll get to that in a second. But that's when those conversations started happening Saturday night. They very quickly accelerated up to the point where this became beyond the point of no return. The power brokers had made up their minds. It was done, and they were going to move on from Brian Kelly. So where they go from here is what we'll talk about. I think it's also very easy sometimes to throw the baby out with the bathwater. When something goes as badly as this game did, as the start of this season has, with LSU at 5-3, now out of the top 25 after being a preseason top 10 team with all the expectations after beating Clemson. We can look at Brian Kelly's tenure and look at some good. He inherited a terrible situation that he took over from Ed Ogeron. They were 5-5 in 2020. They were 6-7 in 2021. They had 38 players on the roster. Kelly established a baseline where they went 10 wins back-to-back seasons. They won the West in year 1. Obviously, Jaden Daniels' Heisman season in year 2 in 2023. But that's the one that I think we'll all look back on and say, but for the worst defense statistically in the history of the program, that might have been Kelly's championship team. That might have been his championship opportunity, but they missed. And this felt like an all-in type season where you had Garrett Nussmeier returning, and Kelly was all in the portal, where he had talked so much about building through the high school ranks, supplementing through the portal. This was a portal-built roster, and it just didn't work. It hasn't worked up until this point. And when you see a performance like Saturday night with everything on the line, and then you're benching your fifth-year senior quarterback, it's hard to come back from that this year. And then as you look forward to next year, where you're going to lose Garrett Nussmeier, and you're going to lose all the transfers who came in, and you're going to lose Aaron Anderson and Chris Hilton and Bauer Sharp and Jack Pyburn and Bernard Gooden and Jacobian Guillory and Jamari Butler and all the AJ Halsey and Mansour Delane will be off to the league, and Harold Perkins. And I mean, next year is a total rebuild. It's a total rebuild. And so the question you'd have to ask yourself is, number one, does Brian Kelly want to be part of that rebuild? And do you think he is the guy that can get you to and through that? And very likely what we're looking at here is a circumstance where you've got a coach who turned 64 on Saturday, who in a new era of college football has not adapted. He made a comment earlier this year about, working with a general manager, saying that's why he never went and never took any of those NFL jobs, because he liked the recruiting and the development of the players part of it. And the game has changed. And Brian Kelly, at this point in his career, feels very much like Nick Saban and other older coaches who have not adapted and adjusted well to this era of football. And so LSU now fires Brian Kelly, and they're on the search for a new coach. So how do they make the money work? And what does that mean for whoever the next coach may be? We'll get to that as we continue Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. College football is back and couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Game Time and in just a couple of taps saw amazing deals. Talking about your favorite college football games as low as $25, and the app makes it super simple. You can see your exact view from your seat before buying. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket go. Download the Game Time app today. One of the biggest questions here with Brian Kelly's firing is, okay, if the $50 million buyout was such a sticking point, how did they come to the point where they were able to accept it? Well, some of you have asked the question, and you've asked the question rightly. And it's phrased in some way as to say, at what point is it more expensive not to fire him? So as to say, if you keep Brian Kelly and fans become increasingly disinterested and you lose ticket holders and attendance and a donor support starts to wane, does it become more expensive to keep him instead of finding a way out? I genuinely don't believe anybody thought that they would be having these conversations even 7 days ago, but here we are. So Brian Kelly's deal, as you may know, he signed a 10-year, $95 million contract with 90% of it guaranteed if he were fired without cause. So as you look at it, it effectively comes down to a monthly payout throughout his career or throughout the 10 years, which comes just shy of about $800,000 a month is basically how it comes. If you just figure 10 years, 120 months, you divide that 95 million, it comes just shy of $800,000 a month. Okay. So LSU would owe Brian Kelly that amount for the 90% of that amount for the duration of the contract, right? That would be through 2031. So for another 6 years, they would have to pay him monthly installments for that amount. When you think of it in terms of maybe a shade under 800 grand a month, that's more palatable than having to come up with a lump sum. If LSU had to come up with a $50 million lump sum payment to Brian Kelly, that would be decidedly more cost prohibitive and probably not doable. But because you're able to spend this and pay this over 6 years, the way it was told to me is you can budget for it. You can effectively look at LSU, which has a 300, is expected this year with the new TV deal and everything going to a 9-game SEC schedule next year, a $300 million annual athletic department budget, that you can find a way to budget and manipulate the money to make this work is effectively how it was termed. It's not ideal, but they can make it work. The other thing that's worth considering is it's not just Brian Kelly's buyout. Remember, you got Brian Kelly's buyout. You have to buy out the rest of his staff. Then you have to hire a new staff in addition to the revenue share component that now is worked in at $20.5 million. Ultimately, this, I was told by one prominent LSU booster Sunday morning, that this whole staff buyout, hiring a new coach, new staff, all of that all in would run LSU in the neighborhood of $100 to $115 million. Like, that is a massive amount of money to have to go fundraise in an era where it is increasingly more difficult to do that with more and more expenses continuing to build and to grow and to swell. There's another piece of this, however, that does factor in with that number, and that's mitigation. You've heard of this before. It's so as to say that if the coach gets a new job elsewhere, the total sum of the buyout would be lessened by that salary. So, for example, Brian Kelly would be owed approximately $54 million. If he were to get a new job that pays him, let's say, $1 million a year, well, as long as he has that job, his buyout would be offset. It would be lessened by that amount, by that $1 million a year. Now, I do not believe Brian Kelly is going to be eager to jump back into coaching. I've not spoken to Brian Kelly. I don't know that he's had a great consideration of that. But just considering what we've talked about here already, the fact that you have a guy that's 64, that's been a head coach for 35 years, that maybe isn't the fondest of rev share, NIL, portal, the way that college football and rosters are built now. He may not be eager to jump back in. And to be honest, what opportunities would be there? Someone most certainly would be willing to hire Brian Kelly, but would it be a prominent program that's competing for a national championship? Probably not. So would he have the desire to do that? I'm guessing probably not. What I can tell you, and if you're an everydayer, you've probably heard me loosely and casually mention this, and I could say to you now that I have heard rumblings that Brian Kelly would be interested in doing TV. And even that maybe Brian Kelly's agent has been shopping for TV opportunities. So let's say Brian Kelly doesn't end up coaching next year, but does end up getting a TV job. I have looked at Brian Kelly's contract, and doing a media job surrounding college football would qualify for mitigation. So whatever he would make as far as his TV contract, his buyout would be offset by that number. So there are ways to get that number a bit lower as well. And then whenever these contract conversations go on, we don't know what may be negotiated. Look, Ed Ogeron in 2021, just 4 years ago, refused to take less. I mean, he got his $17 million. I can't imagine that Brian Kelly, who he and his agent negotiated this, he worked so hard to negotiate this deal in 2021 to get Brian Kelly here from Notre Dame with that 90% buyout guarantee, that he would be eager to just walk away from the $50+ million that he is contractually owed. I wouldn't walk away from that if I'm him. There's no reason to walk away from that. So could they try to negotiate something lesser? Maybe. I just don't know how something like that would even be really feasible without Brian Kelly and his agent, Trace Armstrong's, their willingness to take a lesser number, which I don't know why they would. But I had one booster use the words, it would be, quote, no problem, considering how they could structure the buyout within the athletic department revenue and with booster funds and donations. What I do wonder, and I think this is the very real concern, is if you go to boosters, and I don't mind sharing this with you as well. I was told on Sunday morning that after the game on Saturday, they had $10 million in commitments. I shouldn't say that number directly because to be very clear, that's not an exact number. Let me say it this way, that they had enough committed to effectively cover the full first year of the buyout. Let me say it that way. That's a better way to say it so I don't get nailed on an exact number, because I don't have the exact number, but it was in that ballpark, which would cover, in effect, the first year of the buyout. So if that gives you a year that you're covered already because of donor dollars, and then you might have mitigation to lessen it, and you can structure it certain ways, it becomes more doable how it can be structured. But you can also look and say, well, those are donor dollars that are now not going toward potentially NIL deals or other things within the athletic department that are initiatives you like to get done. Instead, you're just lighting a match to that money to pay a coach not to work. But such is the state of college football. I know a lot of fans ask the question all the time, why do you keep doing these deals? And it's a fair question. But if you want to hire a great coach away from a current situation, you have to put a deal on the table that would be enticing enough to lure them away from their job. Brian Kelly could have stayed at Notre Dame for the rest of his life. You wanted to get him away. How did you do that? Well, you gave him a 10-year deal with $100 million with 90% of it guaranteed and the promise of having an opportunity to come win a championship at LSU, where the three previous coaches all did. So it's challenging in that way, because I don't know how. I agree. I would love to see. I don't mind paying coaches a lot of money if they're winning. You think anybody at Alabama was ever upset with how much money they were spending on Nick Saban? No, because he won all the time. I don't think anybody at Ole Miss is upset that they're spending $11 million a year on Lane Kiffin because he's winning. The only question becomes, if you need to get out of that deal, can you? And that's the challenge. But that's the promises, and that's the guarantees and the protection that the coaches want, and to take your deal, quite honestly, that they deserve. But it's just a little bit of an overview of how the money will work to get out of this $50 million plus buyout that will be an albatross around LSU's collective neck, not only for Kelly, but also his staff, and then hiring a new staff as well. It's not going to be easy, but there's a way that LSU clearly has looked at trying to do it. So who is next? I can't tell you I definitively have that answer, but I can give you some ideas in the direction in which they may point. We'll get to that as we continue Locked On LSU, your team every day. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So the next most obvious question that everyone will ask is, okay, Brian Kelly is out, so who is next? Before we start talking about who is next, it's probably important to talk about who's making the decision and what type of hire is LSU going to make. Something I mentioned on the post-game show after LSU's loss to Texas A&M that I think is worth mentioning again is you have an interesting and uneasy time right now around LSU in the hierarchy of the university. Remember, Scott Woodward is your athletic director. The athletic director is hired or fired by the university president. Well, LSU currently has an interim president in Matt Lee, and the search is ongoing for a permanent president. That permanent will effectively be hired by the LSU Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors works for the governor. They are appointed by the governor. They serve at the pleasure of the governor. So in many respects, the governor, if he wants to, will have some say. And I have mentioned this before, but Governor Jeff Landry in Louisiana and Scott Woodward are political opposites. There have been certain things that Scott Woodward has done that maybe Jeff Landry isn't super fond of and may want to see a change in that position. So if that happens, if in effect, when the new university president comes in, they're looking to make a change at athletic director, is Scott Woodward then the one actually making the hire, or is that hire made above or indirectly of him? That's something worth watching as we move through this. But when you look at this coaching hire, a big part of this, I think, has to be looked through the lens, two specific ideals. Number one, it feels like you have to have a player's coach. In a day and age where players are getting paid, it's more of the NFL model. And what you see in the NFL and with successful teams in college football are the dictatorial old school type coaches are kind of going the way of the dodo bird. That's Brian Kelly. That's Nick Saban. What you see more of are the sort of energetic young players coaches that are having success, or older coaches that have managed to transition, like Andy Reid. Older coach, but undeniably a player's coach. That I think Sean McVay in the NFL. Just look at the coaches that are having great success in the game. And that kind of gives you a sense of maybe what you want. So the player's coach, but the other, I do think, is following an NFL model, because college football as it's built is now more resembling the NFL model, where you have a general manager that is putting the roster together. And yes, the head coach will have a lot of say-so on what players they like, maybe a final say on a transfer player, what style they want, maybe a high school player. But the general manager's job is to build and organize the roster and certainly manage the finances of revenue share and true third-party NIL of how to build that roster. So similar to the NFL, where the coach coaches the team on the field, the general manager is the one doing the contracts and or overseeing and organizing the draft and so on. And yes, the coach has input, but the general manager and the coach, you keep those roles separate. So having someone with NFL experience, I think, would be critical. And if you could blend those two, someone with NFL experience who's also maybe a young players coach type would be beneficial. I know everyone is going to start the conversation with Lane Kiffin. I will tell you that my tenets have always been with coaching searches, and I've gone through so many of these in different sports. Believe nothing, consider everything. Believe nothing, consider everything. So I will not sit here and say definitively Lane Kiffin isn't coming to LSU. Maybe. I think that's a steep hill to climb. I think it would take north of $13 million. I think Ole Miss is going to pay him whatever he wants anyway. And I also think that Lane Kiffin can win a championship at Ole Miss. Not something that could have happened in a different era, but they're proving right now it is possible. So why would he leave? That's one point. But if you could get Lane Kiffin from Ole Miss, brilliant offensive mind, yes, I fully understand why you would want to do that. A couple of guys with LSU ties in the NFL, Joe Brady and Kelvin Shepard, are worth mentioning. Joe Brady, of course, is the offensive coordinator with the Bills. Now, he may become an NFL head coach, but he's one to mention. And Kelvin Shepard presently played at LSU. Presently is the defensive coordinator with Detroit. Great culture organization there with Dan Campbell in Detroit. That's something to mention as well. And then look at college football coaches that just hated the recruiting piece. Look at a guy like Dan Mullen. I know you might scoff at that, but Mullen had a lot of success, and he is a brilliant offensive mind. He just hated recruiting. It's what cost him his gig at Florida. He just didn't want to recruit. Well, in this day and age, you recruit with dollar signs, not with plane trips and meals all over the place. So Mullen is someone kind of in that vein to consider. LSU's just embarking on this, and of course, we're going to follow it all along the way. But drop your comments and let me know your thoughts. But undeniably, LSU took a big swing with Brian Kelly 4 years ago, and they missed. And it's unfortunate. And now they're going to pay a steep financial price for that miss. And it's going to be on Scott Woodward or whoever is making this hire to get the next one right, to get LSU back in national championship contention, because that's what the expectation is. And that's why they're in the situation that they're in right now. Hey, thanks so much for being here with us. If you're on podcast, please subscribe. YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. Smash that like button as well. And let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you every single day. And as long as the search goes along, Locked on LSU, your team every day.